The question asked today is how do we best address things like overtraining, obsessing over diet, etc. with our clients? Basically, how do coaches ensure that clients keep a healthy relationship to their sport? And how do they intervene when the client is moving away from a healthy relationship with their sport? This is a pretty foundational question to what psychological uh, to what we do, psychological coaches and clinicians as well. And the the broad answer is facilitate the athlete or the performer exploring the consequences of their behavior. Uh, we all know from experience that if we just tell an athlete, hey, stop overtraining, they're unlikely to make any major sustainable changes. But if we can guide an athlete to come into contact in kind of a constructive way with, like, what are the consequences of overtraining that are meaningful to them, it can be transformative. So, whether it's overtraining or obsessing over diet or something else, having the conversations around encouraging the performer to explore the maybe secondary or tertiary consequences or direct consequences of that thing, that rigid rule governed behavior, uh, can can really unlock opportunities for them to be like, oh, I didn't recognize that I was doing that thing before, and that's not a behavior that I want to be doing. So let's try something different. Ultimately, that's what you're trying to get to is help them navigate to let's try something different. Uh, the whatever the behavior is, the obsessive overtraining, whatever it may be, that behavior is there because it worked for them at one point. It's really beneficial to approach these conversations from like a I recognize that this thing that you're doing was useful for you at some point, because it was. No behavior shows up because it was detrimental to us previously. It shows up because it was useful. And so approaching from that empathetic place of like, okay, this was useful before, but now we need to move to a new level of sustainable behavior. And maybe part of that move is exploring like why it's not so useful today. That can be a much more collaborative way to have that conversation. If you find that your athlete, your performer, your client is just not receptive to that conversation, or you're having those conversations and yet behavior is not changing, the having the conversations and behavior not changing thing, you might bring that data into the conversation, but the not receptive to it is probably the time to bring in a professional. Okay. And we're not talking like intervention like, hey, performer, I've just brought this psychologist in and we're gonna have a sit down intervention. Like the only thing that's gonna get you is that like 3-year-old in front of in every one of us that's like, no, I'm not gonna do it. Okay. But calling up somebody like myself or a clinical psychologist and be like, hey, here's the situation. I could use some advisement on how to navigate this conversation, or how do we facilitate a warm handoff that they're going to be receptive to so that the performer, the athlete, whoever it may be, actually engages with the professional who's trained in these exact conversations at a much higher level than the coach themselves. So those are the two ways to navigate that conversation and to decide whether or not to escalate it or not.
Editing Pat here. Currently getting the full court press for a doggy dinner, so I'll make this quick. First of all, thanks for watching. I hope this video was useful, and I hope this series is useful. I'd like to ask you to share any questions that you have if you're a coach or an athlete, whether you want to post them in the comments or email me directly at patrick@coachpatricksmith.com. That'd be great. If I decide to use one of your questions, I'll make you a deal. I'll give you an hour consultation with me for free. So post your questions, the best ones that I use for videos, their authors will get an hour's consultation with me. Yeah, thank you again, and here's here's a couple of videos that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy.